I never thought my job as a county zoning commissioner would turn into a full-blown suburban warfare. But that's exactly what happened when I moved into Oakridge Estates last summer. My name is Marcus Ingram, and this is the story of how one power-hungry HOA president picked the wrong driveway to tow a truck from. The first sign of trouble came on a sweltering July morning. I had just finished my third cup of coffee when I glanced out my front window and noticed something was missing specifically. My 2023 Ford F-150 that I'd parked in my own damn driveway the night before. What the hell? I muttered, pressing my face against the glass like it might make my truck magically reappear. I grabbed my phone and was about to call the police when I spotted a small piece of paper that had been slipped under my door. The letter was printed on expensive cream stationery with Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association embossed at the top in pretentious gold lettering. "Dear resident," it began, as if the writer couldn't be bothered to use my name despite the fact that I'd attended the welcome barbecue just 2 weeks ago. "Your vehicle has been removed from the premises due to violation of HOA Covenant Section 12.3. No commercial vehicles may be parked in residential driveways overnight. Please contact the HOA office to discuss retrieval fees and applicable fines. Regards, Barbara Wilson, HOA President." I read the notice 3 times, my blood pressure climbing with each pass. Commercial vehicle. It was my personal truck. Yes, I occasionally used it for work, but it wasn't plastered with logos or company information. And more importantly, it was parked on my own property, the property I was still paying an obscene mortgage for. I threw on some clothes and marched down 3 blocks to the HOA office, a converted colonial that screamed, "We take ourselves too seriously." The door was unlocked, so I walked in without knocking. A middle-aged woman with an immaculate blonde bob and a pink cardigan sat behind the desk, typing furiously on a keyboard. She looked up at me with the practiced smile of someone who had mastered the art of appearing friendly while feeling nothing but contempt. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Yes, I believe you can, Barbara," I replied, recognizing her from the community newsletter's President's Corner photo. "I'm Marcus Ingram. I just moved into 347 Maple Lane and it seems you've stolen my truck." Her smile tightened. "We don't steal, Mr. Ingram. We enforce the covenants that you agreed to when you purchased your home." "I read those covenants cover to cover," I said, placing the notice on her desk. "My F-150 is not a commercial vehicle." Barbara tilted her head like she was explaining something to a child. "It has a truck bed, Mr. Ingram. That classifies it as commercial according to our guidelines." "Show me where it says that." Barbara sighed and pulled out a 3-ring binder the size of an encyclopedia. She flipped through it with the confidence of someone who had memorized every petty rule inside. "Section 12.3, she said, turning the binder toward me. I read the section carefully. "This says, and I quote, 'Vehicles primarily used for commercial purposes may not be parked in residential driveways overnight. My truck is primarily used for personal transportation. There's nothing commercial about it.'" Barbara's smile never faltered, but her eyes hardened. "The board has interpreted pickup trucks to fall under this category unless proven otherwise. Proven otherwise, so I'm guilty until proven innocent. This isn't a court of law, Mr. Ingram. It's a private community with standards." She slid a form across the desk. "The retrieval fee is $275 plus a $150 fine for the violation. Will that be check or credit card?" I felt a vain throb in my forehead but kept my voice steady. "Neither. What you've done is illegal. You can't tow a vehicle from private property without proper cause." We had cause. "The covenants, "The covenants don't say what you claim they say," I interrupted. "And regardless, in this county, you're required to provide 24-hour written notice before towing from a private residence, even with HOA authorization." Barbara's smile flickered. "Are you a lawyer, Mr. Ingram?" "No," I replied, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. "I'm the county zoning commissioner." For a split second, Barbara's perfect composure cracked. Her eyes widened slightly before she regained control. "Well, that's interesting, but our HOA bylaws were approved by the county years ago." "Approval doesn't grant immunity from county ordinances," I said. "Now, I'd like my truck returned immediately, with no fees, or I'll be filing a formal complaint with both the county and the police department for theft and violation of towing regulations." "The board will need to discuss this," Barbara said stiffly. "The board isn't here. You made this decision and you can unmake it." I pulled out my phone, "Or I can start making calls. Your choice." After a tense standoff, Barbara picked up her phone and called the towing company. 20 minutes later, I was back in possession of my truck, but I knew this was far from over. Barbara Wilson had made it clear with her parting words, "The board will be reviewing this incident at our next meeting." I drove home wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I'd moved to Oakridge Estates because it was close to work, had good schools for when I eventually started a family, and seemed like a peaceful place to live. I hadn't anticipated going to war with the HOA within the first month. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank, watering his immaculate lawn. He waved me over. "Saw them take your truck this morning," he said without preamble. "Barbara on the warpath again. You could say that. Is she always this enthusiastic about enforcement?" Frank laughed. A short, harsh sound. "Barbara Wilson has been HOA president for 7 years running. Nobody runs against her because nobody wants to deal with the headache. She's turned this place into her personal fiefdom." "How does she keep getting elected if everyone hates her so much?" I asked. "Most people don't vote. They don't want to get involved. And Barbara has a loyal following of about 20 neighbors who show up to every meeting and vote as a block." Frank turned off his hose and lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think half of them are scared of being targeted if they don't support her." "Targeted?" Frank nodded. "Selective enforcement. You cross Barbara, suddenly your grass is too long, or your mailbox is the wrong shade of black, or your holiday decorations are up for too many days." She knows the bylaws backward and forward and uses them like weapons. I thought about my position at the county. I dealt with unreasonable people regularly, but they usually had legitimate concerns about land use or development. This felt different, pettier, and more personal. "Thanks for the warning," I told Frank. "I'll keep my head down." "Good luck with that," Frank replied with a knowing smile. "Word travels fast here. By dinner, everyone will know you got your truck back without paying the fine. Barbara doesn't forget things like that." Frank was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received notices for violations I didn't even know existed. My garbage can was visible from the street. I had to build a small enclosure. The American flag on my porch was displayed on a non-regulation bracket. I had to purchase an approved model. My grass exceeded the maximum allowed height by half an inch. I had to mow it twice a week. Each notice came with a warning that fines would follow if I didn't correct the issues promptly. I complied with each one, determined not to give Barbara any ammunition. But compliance didn't seem to be her goal. Submission was. The breaking point came when I received a notice that the color of my front door, which had been painted before I moved in, was not on the approved color palette and needed to be repainted within 7 days. The approved colors all seemed to be variations of beige, gray, and topped the most inoffensive, bland colors imaginable. That weekend, I spent hours at the county records office, reviewing the official Oakridge Estates documents. What I found was interesting. The original covenants approved by the county were significantly less restrictive than the version Barbara had shown me. Over the years, the HOA board had added amendments without properly filing them with the county, a technical violation that rendered many of their rules unenforceable. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting scheduled for Monday evening. I arrived early and took a seat in the back of the community center. About 30 residents showed up, a surprisingly good turnout according to Frank, who sat next to me. "Monthly sacrificial offering," he whispered. "Someone always leaves in tears." Barbara called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m. She was flanked by 4 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The agenda was projected on a screen, and I noticed my truck incident was listed under new business. For the first hour, Barbara droned on about landscaping contracts, the community pool's upcoming resurfacing, and a proposed increase in HOA dues to cover administrative costs. Few people asked questions, and those who did were quickly shut down with references to bylaws and previous board decisions. Finally, we reached the new business portion of the meeting. "As some of you may know," Barbara began, her gaze fixing on me, "we recently had an incident with a resident who believes the rules don't apply to him." She proceeded to give a completely distorted version of our encounter, making it sound like I had bullied and threatened her into releasing my truck. When she finished, she smiled thinly. "The board has decided to clarify the language in Section 12.3 to explicitly include all pickup trucks as commercial vehicles, regardless of use. This will prevent any future misunderstandings." That was my cue. I stood up. "Point of order," I said loudly. Barbara's smile faltered. "This isn't a court, Mr. Ingram. We don't recognize points of order." "Robert's Rules of Order," I replied. "Your own bylaws state that meetings are conducted according to them. I'm raising a point of order regarding procedure." A murmur went through the room. Barbara looked briefly at one of the board members, who nodded reluctantly. "Fine," she said. "What is your point of order? Any amendment to the covenants requires a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, not just the board. Additionally, all amendments must be properly filed with the county to be enforceable." I looked around the room. "How many of you are aware that many of the rules you're being cited for aren't legally binding?" The murmuring grew louder. Barbara banged her gavel. "Mr. Ingram, you're out of order. This is not the time for grandstanding." "I'm not grandstanding," I replied calmly. "I'm informing my neighbors of their rights. As county zoning commissioner, it's actually part of my job." The room went completely silent. Many residents were hearing about my position for the first time, and I could see the wheels turning. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've reviewed the towing ordinances for this county. The HOA violated at least 3 regulations when towing my vehicle, including failure to provide notice and improper documentation of the alleged violation. If this has happened to anyone else here, you may have grounds for a complaint." Barbara's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, banging her gavel again. "You can't adjourn during a point of order," I said. "That's also in Robert's rules." One of the board members, a nervous-looking man with glasses, cleared his throat. "He's right, Barbara. We should let him finish." Barbara shot him a look that could have melted steel, but she nodded stiffly. "Fine. Finish your point, Mr. Ingram." "Thank you. My point is simple. This HOA has been operating outside its legal authority in several areas. I've prepared a document outlining the discrepancies between the filed covenants and the version being enforced." I held up a stack of papers. I have copies for anyone who's interested." Nearly every hand in the room went up. As I distributed the documents, Barbara sat rigidly in her chair, her expression murderous. When the meeting finally ended an hour later, after numerous heated exchanges, residents surrounded me with questions and stories of their own HOA encounters. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find Chloe Evans, a woman I recognized from the neighborhood but hadn't formally met. "That was impressive," she said with a warm smile. "I've lived here for 3 years and never seen anyone stand up to Barbara like that." "Someone had to," I replied, feeling slightly embarrassed by the attention. "I'm Chloe," she said, extending her hand. "I live 2 streets over on Willow Way." "Marcus," I replied, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you officially." "Listen," she lowered her voice. "A bunch of us are talking about finally doing something about the HOA situation. Would you be interested in helping?" I hesitated. I had only planned to defend myself, not start a revolution. But the more I heard from my neighbors about Barbara's reign of terror, elderly residents fined for medical equipment visible from the street, families penalized for children's toys left out, ridiculous restrictions on everything from bird feeders to vegetable gardens, the more I realized this was about more than just my truck. "Count me in," I told Chloe. "What did you have in mind?" That conversation marked the beginning of what the neighborhood would later call the HOA rebellion of Oakridge Estates. Chloe, it turned out, was a corporate attorney who had been documenting Barbara's overreach for years, but had never found enough allies to challenge her effectively. We formed a committee of concerned residents, meeting weekly at different homes to stay under Barbara's radar. Our first priority was education, making sure every homeowner understood which rules were enforceable and which weren't. We created a simple guide and distributed it anonymously throughout the neighborhood. Barbara's response was swift and predictable. Violation notices increased across the board, especially targeting those she suspected of being involved in our group. My own mailbox became stuffed with citations for infractions so minor they bordered on the absurd: a garden hose not properly coiled, a single weed in my mulch bed, a non-conforming welcome mat. 2 weeks after our first meeting, I arrived home to find another towing notice on my door. This time, Barbara claimed my truck was parked too close to the curb, violating a regulation about street sight lines. The notice informed me that if the truck wasn't moved within 2 hours, it would be towed again. I immediately called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher promised to send a deputy to document the situation before any towing occurred. I also took extensive photos and measurements showing that my truck was parked completely within my driveway, nowhere near the street. An hour later, a tow truck from Quick Action Towing, the same company used last time, pulled up in front of my house. I walked outside with my phone recording. "Can I help you?" I asked the driver. He consulted a clipboard. "Got an order to tow a Ford F-150 from this address." "That would be my truck, which is parked legally on my private property," I said calmly. "May I see the towing authorization?" The driver handed me a form signed by Barbara Wilson. It cited a non-existent regulation about proximity to public right-of-way. "This isn't valid," I told him. "There's no such regulation in the county code or the HOA covenants." The driver shrugged. "Look, man, I just go where they tell me. If you have an issue, take it up with whoever called us." "I understand you're just doing your job," I said, "but I've already contacted the sheriff's department. A deputy is on the way to document this situation. If you proceed with an unauthorized tow from private property, both you and your company could be liable." The driver looked uncomfortable. "Let me call my boss." While he made his call, a sheriff's deputy arrived. I explained the situation, showed him the documentation I'd prepared about the previous towing incident, and pointed out that the regulation cited didn't exist. The deputy, Officer Reynolds, reviewed everything carefully. "This looks like a civil dispute between you and the HOA," he said finally. "But I can confirm that your vehicle is parked legally and entirely on your property. I'll document that in my report." He turned to the tow truck driver, who was still on the phone. "I wouldn't recommend towing this vehicle without a court order or proper authorization. Could create some legal problems for you." The driver nodded, said something into the phone, and then hung up. "Boss says to stand down," he told me. "Sorry for the trouble." As the tow truck pulled away, I noticed Barbara watching from down the street, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed at me, a clear message that this wasn't over. Officer Reynolds followed my gaze. "That the HOA president," I nodded. "Might want to watch your back," he advised. "These HOA disputes can get nasty." "I'm starting to realize that," I replied. That night, Chloe called to tell me that several other residents had received similar towing threats. We agreed to accelerate our plans. The next day, we filed a formal complaint with the county against the Oakridge Estates HOA, citing multiple violations of county ordinances, improper amendments to the covenants, and harassment of homeowners. Because of my position, I recused myself from any official involvement in the county's response, but I made sure the complaint landed on the desk of Commissioner Janet Blackwell, who had a well-known distaste for overreaching HOAs. What I didn't anticipate was Barbara's next move. 3 days after we filed the complaint, I came home to find my front yard dug up and a citation on my door claiming I had an unauthorized irrigation system modification that needed immediate inspection. The citation demanded access to my home within 24 hours. I called Chloe immediately. "They destroyed my yard and now they want to enter my house." "Don't let them in," she advised. "They have no legal right to enter your home without your permission, regardless of what the bylaws claim. Document the damage to your yard and call the police. This is vandalism." I followed her advice, taking dozens of photos before calling the non-emergency line again. This time, a different deputy responded, but the outcome was the same. This was a civil matter, but the damage to my property could potentially be criminal if I could prove who did it. That would be difficult, as none of my neighbors had seen anything, and I didn't have security cameras installed and oversight I immediately planned to correct. The next morning, I was awakened at 6:00 a.m. by the sound of a lawn mower directly outside my bedroom window. I peered through the blinds to see a landscaping crew working on my torn-up lawn. A familiar blonde bob caught my eye. Barbara was supervising the work personally. I threw on some clothes and went outside. "What's going on?" I demanded. Barbara smiled sweetly. "Good morning, Mr. Ingram. We're addressing the irrigation violation on your property. By destroying my lawn, I never authorized this. Section 8.2 of the covenants gives the HOA the right to remedy violations at the homeowner's expense if they aren't addressed within the specified time frame." She held up a clipboard. "You were given notice yesterday." "That's not how this works," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "You can't just enter my property and start digging things up. We can, and we are." Barbara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The bill for these repairs will be added to your HOA account. Failure to pay will result in a lien on your property." I pulled out my phone and called Chloe, putting her on speaker. "Chloe, Barbara and a landscaping crew are on my property right now, tearing up my lawn without permission. What are my options?" Chloe's voice was clear and confident. That's trespassing and destruction of property. Tell them to leave immediately. If they refuse, call the police. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Barbara's smile finally faltered. You should be careful about making accusations, Mr. Ingram. The HOA has broad powers, not as broad as you think, I interrupted. You have exactly 1 minute to get these people off my property before I call the police and file charges for trespassing and vandalism. Barbara stared at me, apparently weighing her options. Finally, she turned to the landscaping crew. Pack up. We'll continue this later. As they departed, Barbara paused at the edge of my driveway. This isn't over, Mr. Ingram. You're making a serious mistake challenging me. No, Barbara, you made the mistake when you towed my truck. Everything since then has just been digging yourself deeper. By the time Chloe arrived, Barbara was gone, but the damage to my yard remained. Trenches dug throughout the lawn, sprinkler heads removed, and piles of dirt everywhere. Chloe surveyed the destruction, taking photos with her phone. This is going to help our case, she said. She's escalating, which means she's getting desperate. Or more dangerous, I added. What's to stop her from trying to enter my house when I'm not here? Chloe's expression turned serious. You need security cameras immediately. And I think we should move up the timeline for our next step. Our next step was a petition to call a special meeting for removing the current board. According to the bylaws, we needed signatures from 25% of homeowners. With the evidence of Barbara's recent actions, gathering those signatures proved surprisingly easy. Many residents had been suffering silently, afraid to speak out but eager to support change when given the opportunity. Within 3 days, we had the required signatures. I hand-delivered the petition to the HOA office, but Barbara wasn't there. Instead, the nervous board member I'd seen at the meeting, whose name I now knew was Ted, accepted the document with visible discomfort. She's not going to like this, he muttered. That's not my concern, I replied. The bylaws require a special meeting to be scheduled within 14 days of receiving this petition. Make sure that happens, Ted, he nodded glumly. I'll make sure it's handled properly. I believed him, but I should have anticipated that Barbara wouldn't go down without a fight. The very next day, I received a certified letter informing me that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against me for defamation, harassment, and interfering with HOA operations. The letter demanded that I cease all actions against the HOA immediately or face significant financial penalties. I forwarded the letter to Chloe, who called me within minutes. This is a slap suit, she explained. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into backing down by threatening expensive legal proceedings. Is there any merit to it? None whatsoever. But that's not the point. The point is to scare you with legal fees and hassle. Chloe sounded more angry than worried. The good news is that our state has strong anti-slap laws. We can get this dismissed and potentially recover attorneys' fees. So we countersue. Absolutely, Chloe confirmed. And not just you. I've heard from 3 other homeowners who received similar letters. We'll file a joint response and anti-slap motion. 2 days later, we received notice that the special meeting would be held in the community center the following Tuesday. The announcement included a lengthy defense of the current board's actions and warned of instability and decline of property values if leadership changed. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Our group created informational flyers, went door to door to ensure maximum attendance, and prepared a detailed presentation of the board's violations. Meanwhile, Barbara wasn't sitting idle. Her supporters distributed their own flyers accusing us of trying to remove all HOA protections and warning that, without strict enforcement, the neighborhood would descend into chaos. The tension was palpable throughout Oakridge Estates. Neighbors who had previously exchanged pleasantries now eyed each other suspiciously, trying to determine which side everyone was on. I received several anonymous notes in my mailbox, some supporting our efforts, others containing veiled threats about what happens to troublemakers. On Monday afternoon, the day before the special meeting, I arrived home to find my driveway blocked by a large delivery truck. The driver was unloading pallets of sod and gardening supplies onto my torn-up lawn. "What's going on?" I asked him. "HOA ordered emergency landscaping repairs," he explained, handing me an invoice. "Said to bill the homeowner directly." I looked at the invoice, over $4,000 for irrigation system repair and lawn restoration. At the bottom was a note: "Failure to accept delivery will result in additional HOA violations and fines." I called Chloe immediately, and she advised me to accept the delivery but document everything and not to pay the invoice. "This is just another intimidation tactic," she assured me. "They're trying to create a financial burden right before the vote." After the delivery truck left, I was surveying the mess when a county vehicle pulled up. A woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair stepped out, carrying a clipboard. I recognized her as Linda Miller from the county permit office. "Mr. Ingram," she asked, "I'm here about a reported zoning violation on your property." "Zoning violation?" I repeated, confused. "What violation?" Linda looked uncomfortable. "We received a complaint that you're operating a commercial landscaping business from your residential property." She gestured to the pallets of sod and supplies. The complainant provided photos of commercial materials being delivered. I laughed in disbelief. "Linda, you know me." "I work for the county. This is the HOA's doing. They tore up my yard and then delivered these materials without my authorization." Linda sighed. "I figured it was something like that. I've dealt with this HOA before." She made some notes on her clipboard. "I'll mark this as an unfounded complaint, but just be aware they're escalating things to the county level now." "Thanks for the warning," I replied, shaking my head at Barbara's audacity. That evening, I installed security cameras at my front and back doors, something I should have done weeks earlier. I had just finished setting them up when my phone rang. It was Frank, my neighbor. "You need to get over to the community center," he said without preamble. "Barbara's called an emergency board meeting. They're trying to change the voting rules before tomorrow's meeting." "They can't do that," I protested. "The bylaws require 30 days' notice for any changes to voting procedures." "Since when has that stopped her?" Frank replied. "You better hurry." "Meeting started 10 minutes ago." I called Chloe on my way, and she promised to meet me there with as many of our supporters as she could round up on short notice. When I arrived at the community center, the parking lot was half full. Not a great turnout, but more than I expected for a hastily called evening meeting. Inside, Barbara was standing at the podium, reading from a document. "Therefore, to ensure proper verification of homeowner status, all votes at tomorrow's special meeting must be cast in person with government ID and proof of current HOA dues payment." I walked to the front of the room. "Point of order," I called out. "This change violates Section 4 of the bylaws, which requires 30 days' notice for any modification to voting procedures." Barbara looked up, her expression hardening when she saw me. "This isn't a modification. It's a clarification of existing rules." "Show me where in the existing rules it says votes require government ID and proof of payment," I challenged. The room had gone quiet. Even Barbara's supporters looked uncomfortable with this transparent attempt to suppress votes. Before Barbara could respond, The door opened and Chloe walked in, followed by at least 15 residents. She didn't miss a beat, walking straight to the front of the room. Any attempt to change voting procedures less than 24 hours before a duly called special meeting is not only a violation of our bylaws but potentially illegal voter suppression, Chloe announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room. As an attorney, I'd advise the board to reconsider this action, as it could expose individual board members to personal liability. Ted, the nervous board member, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion until after tomorrow's meeting. Barbara shot him a venomous look but was clearly outnumbered. Fine, she snapped. The meeting is adjourned. As people filed out, Barbara approached me, her voice low and threatening. You have no idea what you're doing. I've built this community, protected property values, maintained standards. You're going to destroy everything. The only thing being destroyed is your little fiefdom, I replied quietly. This neighborhood doesn't belong to you, Barbara. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. The next morning, I woke up early, too anxious to sleep. The special meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m., and I had taken the day off work to prepare. As I made coffee, my security camera app alerted me to movement at my front door. I checked the feed to see Barbara herself placing something in my mailbox. Curious, I waited until she left before going outside to investigate. Inside the mailbox was an official-looking envelope from the HOA. I opened it to find a notice that I was being fined $5,000 for unauthorized landscaping modifications and operating a business from a residential property. The notice included photos of the sod delivery from yesterday, the delivery Barbara herself had arranged. The circular logic was almost impressive. Create a violation, document the violation, then fine me for the violation. I called Chloe to update her, and she was not surprised. She's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, she said. Keep the notice for evidence, but otherwise ignore it. Tonight's what matters. I spent the day making final preparations and checking in with our supporters. By 6:30 p.m., I was at the community center, helping set up chairs. The turnout exceeded our expectations. Nearly 200 residents packed the room, representing over 70% of Oakridge Estates households. Barbara arrived exactly at 7:00 p.m., flanked by her board members and a man in an expensive suit who I assumed was her attorney. She looked momentarily shocked at the size of the crowd but quickly composed herself. This meeting will come to order, she announced, banging her gavel. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Mr. Henderson, the association's legal counsel, who will explain the proper voting procedures for tonight. The attorney stepped forward, but Chloe immediately stood up. Point of order. The agenda for this special meeting was specified in the petition. Any attempt to introduce new procedures would be out of order. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Barbara's face tightened, but she nodded to the attorney to sit down. Fine, she said. Let's proceed with the first item, discussion of the motion to remove the current board. For the next hour, residents stood up one after another to share their experiences with the HOA under Barbara's leadership. Stories of selective enforcement, excessive fines, and petty harassment painted a damning picture. When it was my turn, I simply recounted the events since my truck was towed, letting the facts speak for themselves. Finally, it was Barbara's turn to defend the board. She spoke passionately about property values, community standards, and the dangers of lax enforcement. She pointed to the well-maintained common areas and low crime rate as evidence of her effective leadership. Without strong guidelines and consistent enforcement, she concluded, Oakridge Estates will quickly deteriorate. Is that really what you want for your neighborhood? to look like the communities without HOAs where cars sit on blocks and trash piles up in yards. When the debate concluded, we moved to the vote. Each household had one vote, and a 2/3 majority was required to remove the board. As the ballots were collected and counted by volunteer residents, with observers from both sides, the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, the results were announced. 143 votes for removal, 52 against. The current board was officially removed, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Barbara sat stone-faced, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. When the noise died down, Chloe stood up to address the next item on the agenda, appointing an interim board until proper elections could be held. 5 names were nominated, including mine, despite my protests. The interim board was approved overwhelmingly, and I found myself elected as interim president, a role I had never sought but couldn't refuse given the circumstances. As the meeting adjourned, Barbara approached me, her expression unreadable. "Congratulations," she said, her voice flat. "I hope you're prepared for what comes next." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "Running an HOA isn't as easy as tearing one down, you'll see." With that cryptic warning, she walked away, her attorney trailing behind her. I watched her go, wondering if this was truly the end or just the beginning of a new phase in our conflict. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity, as the interim board worked to restore sanity to Oakridge Estates. We immediately suspended all pending fines and violation notices, commissioned an audit of the HOA finances, and began the process of aligning our bylaws with the county-approved covenants. What we discovered in the financial audit was shocking. Under Barbara's leadership, the HOA had accumulated a substantial legal defense fund that had been used primarily to pursue residents who challenged her authority. There were also questionable payments to consulting firms that appeared to be owned by friends of board members. More disturbing were the selective enforcement patterns we uncovered. Residents who had crossed Barbara received an average of 4.3 violation notices per month, while her supporters averaged just 0.2 clear evidence of the weaponization of HOA rules. Armed with this information, we called another community meeting to present our findings and outline our plan for reforms. The turnout was even better than the special meeting, with residents eager to participate in reshaping their community governance. Our proposed reforms included transparency measures for HOA finances, clear guidelines for rule enforcement, limits on fines, and a more democratic process for board elections. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many residents volunteering to serve on committees to implement these changes. As the meeting concluded, I noticed Frank talking with Chloe near the refreshment table. I joined them, gratefully accepting the coffee Chloe handed me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her expression concerned. "Exhausted," I admitted. "I never wanted to run an HOA, I just wanted to park my truck in peace." Frank chuckled. "Be careful what you wish for, but seriously, you're doing great. People are actually excited about the HOA for once instead of dreading it." "Thanks, but it's a team effort." I looked at Chloe. "I couldn't have done any of this without your legal expertise." She smiled warmly. "Happy to help." "And maybe once things settle down, we could—" She was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Officer Reynolds from the sheriff's department walked in, scanning the room until he spotted me. "Mr. Ingram," he called, walking over. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I replied, suddenly concerned. "Is something wrong?" He lowered his voice. "Just thought you should know we arrested Barbara Wilson about an hour ago." "Arrested?" I echoed, shocked. "For what?" "Fraud, primarily." After your HOA audit findings were submitted to the county, our financial crimes unit started looking deeper into those consulting firms. Turns out they don't actually exist. They're shell companies Barbara set up to funnel HOA funds to herself. We're talking about roughly $175,000 over the past 5 years. I was stunned. I knew she was selectively enforcing rules, but embezzlement, that's a whole different level. Officer Reynolds nodded. People with that kind of controlling personality often have other issues. When we executed the search warrant at her house, we found files on almost every resident, personal information, photos of their properties, notes on potential violations, almost like opposition research. That's disturbing, Chloe said. There's more, Officer Reynolds continued. We found evidence linking her to the vandalism of your yard, Mr. Ingram. Text messages to a landscaping contractor ordering the work and explicitly stating it was to teach him a lesson. She's facing criminal mischief charges for that as well. Frank shook his head in disbelief. All this over a truck in a driveway. It was never really about the truck, I replied. It was about control. In the following days, the story of Barbara's arrest made the local news, bringing unwanted attention to Oakridge Estates. Many residents were embarrassed by the publicity, but others saw it as a necessary cleansing, the end of an era of petty tyranny. The interim board continued its work, and within 3 months, we had completely overhauled the HOA structure. The new bylaws, properly filed with the county, emphasized community building over restrictive enforcement. Fines were reserved for serious issues that affected safety or property values, not cosmetic preferences. When election day came for the permanent board, I declined to run. My work as county zoning commissioner was demanding enough, and I had never aspired to HOA leadership. Instead, I nominated Chloe, who had proven herself not only a skilled attorney but a natural community builder who could balance individual rights with collective interests. She was elected president by a landslide, along with a diverse board that included both longtime residents and newcomers. Under their leadership, Oakridge Estates began to transform from a neighborhood defined by fear and conformity to one characterized by cooperation and mutual respect. As for Barbara, she eventually pleaded guilty to reduce charges of misappropriation of funds and criminal mischief. She was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA. She also agreed never to serve on an HOA board again, a condition I suspected hurt her more than any financial penalty. 6 months after that fateful morning when I discovered my truck missing, I sat on my front porch with Chloe, enjoying the peaceful evening. My yard had been properly restored, at the HOA's expense, using the recovered funds from Barbara's restitution, and my truck sat proudly in the driveway where it belonged. You ever think about how differently things might have turned out if Barbara had just left your truck alone? Chloe asked, sipping her wine. I laughed. All the time. If she had just knocked on my door and talked to me like a normal neighbor, we probably could have worked something out. Instead, she picked a fight with the county zoning commissioner and lost everything, Chloe said, shaking her head. The irony is that she was so obsessed with property values, but her actions were what threatened them the most. A toxic HOA can be worse for values than no HOA at all. True, I agreed. Though I have to admit, in a strange way, I'm almost grateful to her. If not for Barbara's vendetta, I might never have gotten involved in the community. I certainly wouldn't have met you. Chloe smiled and reached for my hand. Well, when you put it that way, maybe we should send her a thank you card. We both laughed at the absurdity of it. As we sat there watching the sunset over our peaceful neighborhood, I reflected on the journey from being a new homeowner just wanting to be left alone to becoming part of a true community. Sometimes it takes conflict to build connection, and it took an HOA tyrant to teach me the value of engaged citizenship. My truck still sits in my driveway every night, but now it's not just a symbol of personal property rights, it's a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can transform an entire community. And that's worth far more than any HOA approval ever could be.